Hi there. How are you getting on? I hope you are doing all right. Now, did you know that there's social distancing in the Bible? Bet you didn't. I didn't realise it till I was reading through some of Leviticus the other day. Now, Leviticus isn't the kind of book that most people generally kind of read through for fun. It can seem pretty heavy. And if you've dipped your toe into it, you'll know that there's lots of stuff in Leviticus that is to do with rules and regulations, loads of laws, all that kind of stuff. But there's some bits in Leviticus 13 and 14 where actually God's people have to socially distance and they have to self-isolate. Because in 13 and 14 of chapters 13 and 14 of Leviticus, there's a whole load of rules and regulations to do with preventing the spread of infection and disease around the camp. Because bear in mind, you had hundreds of thousands, maybe a couple of million people all together living in tents. That's not a good place to. And a good situation to keep things clean. You had to work really hard at keeping things clean, and in that situation the spread of disease would have happened very quickly and easily. And so God is actually very practical and pragmatic. Well, there's two things going on here. The first is practical and pragmatic. So the priests in Leviticus 13 and 14, if somebody had or suspected that they had some sort of a skin disease or a rash, they had to go and see the priest, and the priest acted as a doctor as well. Pleased that clergy don't have to do that. The priest acted as a doctor. They had to check it out, and if there's any doubt, they had to self-isolate outside of the camp on their own for 7 days. They then had to go and be checked out again, and if there was still any doubt, they had to be isolated for another 7 days. And the people had to be really careful. And so in Leviticus 13 and 14, and it goes on in the next couple of chapters as well, God gives rules and regulations to keep his people healthy, to limit and prevent the spread of disease and infection. But there's something else going on in these chapters as well. It's not just about limiting the spread of disease and infection. It's also about relationship with God as well, because all of the rules and regulations are about people's sin and the fallenness of the world and a holy God. We've had all the stuff to do with the tabernacle and where they worship God, and the tabernacle's in the centre of the camp, but they are to be clean and pure and holy. And different things can defile them and can make them unclean, whether it's sickness and disease, or whether it's sin, or whether there's links between their sin and their sickness and disease, or all sorts of other things. But the point is, God is holy and perfect. They're not holy and perfect, and sin, disease is a sign I guess a way of seeing that our world is fallen and it's broken, in the same way as natural disasters and all the rest of it. Not that God is causing it on us, but it's a sign that our world is broken and that we are broken too, and that we are sinful. And so there's all these rules and regulations for people to do to get themselves right with a holy God. And actually, when you read Leviticus, I think it could potentially get quite overwhelming, because there's so many things that the people have to do. And as I say, some of those things are very practical and pragmatic, but they also involve sacrifice and great cost and expense. But we live the other side of the cross, where we don't have to work super hard at getting ourselves right with a holy God, because Jesus has done that for us in the cross. When we look at our disease and the sickness in the world, we don't suddenly think, oh goodness, I need to make lots of sacrifices because I've been sinful and I need to get right with God. No, if we're trusting in Jesus, we're right with God because of him. And yes, God can teach us through difficult times. God can teach us and bring us closer to him through our suffering, through our sin, through our sickness, through our disease, through our broken and fallen world. But ultimately, we are holy and pleasing to God because Jesus has died in our place. The one true perfect sacrifice. That's why we don't need to make hundreds of sacrifices. That's why we don't need to climb the rungs of the ladder step by step to try and get us to be a better person to be with God. Now, we keep trusting God and we keep living for him and we keep trying to live to please him because of what Jesus has done, because we love him, because we're in a relationship with him. But it's not going to get us right with God. The wonderful thing is this side of the cross, Jesus has paid the price. He's paid the costly price. He's made the sacrifice. So dip your toe into Leviticus. Read Leviticus 13 and 14 and 15 and 16, some of those chapters. And yes, it can seem a bit complicated, but look at it and go, wow, look at all that they had to do to get them right with God, and still they had to keep making sacrifices, and look what Jesus has done instead of that. Look what Jesus has done in my place to get me right with God. That's what reading Leviticus should do to our hearts and our minds. I hope you find that helpful.